Welcome to Reddit Nightmares, where the internet's most disturbing true confessions come to life. Hit subscribe if you're brave enough for more real horror confessions that will follow you into your dreams. The fluorescent lights of the Sunoco station cut through the midnight fog like a lighthouse beacon, illuminating little beyond the concrete island where 4 gas pumps stood sentinel. Mallory Hall guided her Honda Civic beneath the harsh glow, the tires crunching over small pebbles scattered across the forecourt. The engine sputtered as she turned the key, a reminder that the 20-year-old vehicle was approaching the end of its functional life. Not that she needed the reminder. The fuel gauge hovering near empty had already made that abundantly clear. She'd been driving for almost 14 hours straight, stopping only for bathroom breaks and to refill her thermos with whatever burnt coffee the last 3 gas stations had to offer. The interstate stretched endlessly across the Appalachian wilderness, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through dense forest that seemed to press closer with each passing mile. Mallory hadn't intended to drive through the night, but the alternative, finding a motel in this remote stretch of West Virginia, had seemed increasingly unlikely as the towns grew smaller and the distances between them greater. Her phone had died 3 hours ago. The car charger had frayed months earlier, and replacing it had always fallen to the bottom of her priority list, below rent and groceries and the medication she couldn't afford to skip. The radio had cut out an hour after that, leaving her with nothing but the hum of tires on pavement and the occasional flicker of headlights from a passing truck. Now, standing beside the pump as gasoline flowed into her tank, Mallory rubbed her eyes and tried to focus. The digital readout on the pump ticked upward, $15.64, $15.65, $15.66, each sent another fraction of her dwindling bank account. She'd done the math in her head repeatedly over the last 100 miles. If she filled the tank here, she'd have just enough to make it to Pittsburgh by morning, with perhaps $20 left for food until she could access her emergency credit card at her sister's apartment. A sound from inside her car made her start. Had that been a cough? She peered through the driver's window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The back seat was piled with hastily packed suitcases and boxes, everything she could fit when she'd fled her apartment in Knoxville. The rest of her possessions remained behind, abandoned to whatever fate her ex-boyfriend's rage would determine for them. She was being paranoid. Nobody was in her car. Nobody had followed her. Ryan didn't even know she had gone to her sister's. She had been careful about that, mentioning only vague plans about staying with a college friend somewhere in Ohio. The cough, if she'd heard anything at all, was probably just the settling of her possessions or the tick of the engine cooling down. Now, standing beside the pump as gasoline flowed into her tank, Mallory rubbed her eyes and tried to focus. The digital readout on the pump ticked upward, $15.64, $15.65, $15.66, each sent another fraction of her dwindling bank account. She'd done the math in her head repeatedly over the last 100 miles. If she filled the tank here, she'd have just enough to make it to Pittsburgh by morning, with perhaps $20 left for food until she could access her emergency credit card at her sister's apartment. A sound from inside her car made her start. Had that been a cough? She peered through the driver's window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The back seat was piled with hastily packed suitcases and boxes, everything she could fit when she'd fled her apartment in Knoxville. The rest of her possessions remained behind, abandoned to whatever fate her ex-boyfriend's rage would determine for them. She was being paranoid. Nobody was in her car. Nobody had followed her. Ryan didn't even know she had gone to her sister's. She had been careful about that, mentioning only vague plans about staying with a college friend somewhere in Ohio. The cough, if she'd heard anything at all, was probably just the settling of her possessions or the tick of the engine cooling down. She grabbed a packaged sandwich from the refrigerated section. Ham and cheese on white bread, probably dry and flavorless but protein nonetheless, and a bag of chips. As an afterthought, she added a bottle of water and a chocolate bar. The sugar would help keep her awake. The cashier set his phone down as she approached the counter. His name tag read Dale. "Find everything okay?" he asked, his tone suggesting the question was more reflex than genuine inquiry. "Yes, thanks," Mallory replied, setting her items on the counter. "And I had 3217 on pump 3. Dale nodded and began scanning her purchases. His movements were mechanical, practiced from thousands of identical transactions. "Long drive tonight?" he asked, glancing up at her briefly. Mallory hesitated. She didn't want to share details with strangers, another lesson learned from her relationship with Ryan. "Just passing through," she said eventually. "Heading north or south?" "North." Dale nodded again. "Pittsburgh." The accuracy of his guess made her uncomfortable. Eventually, she said, keeping her voice neutral. She pulled her wallet from her purse, extracting her debit card. "That'll be $41.89, Dale said, bagging her items with quick efficiency. Mallory swiped her card, holding her breath until the machine beeped its approval. Relief flooded through her as the receipt began to print. She still had enough to make it to her sister's. As Dale handed her the receipt, his fingers brushed against hers. She felt something thin and papery being pressed into her palm along with the receipt. Dale's eyes met hers, suddenly intense and serious. "Have a good night," he said, his voice pitched slightly lower than before. "Drive safe." Confused, Mallory stepped away from the counter, her hand closing reflexively around whatever Dale had passed to her. She waited until she was halfway to the door before looking down at her palm. It was a small square of paper torn from a notepad. Written on it in hasty block letters were 10 words that turned her blood to ice. "Don't leave. There's someone in your back seat. Call 911. Mallory froze, her heart thundering suddenly in her chest. She turned slowly, looking back at Dale, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, some small-town gas station attendant amusing himself at the expense of travelers passing through. But something in Dale's eyes told her this was no joke. And then she remembered the sound she'd thought she'd heard while pumping gas. The cough. Her car sat just outside the windows, illuminated under the fluorescent lights. From this angle, she couldn't see into the back seat clearly. The pile of her belongings created shadows and recesses where someone could easily hide. But that was impossible. She'd been driving for hours without stopping. The doors had been locked. No one could have gotten in. Unless they'd been there the whole time. Unless they'd been waiting in her car back in Knoxville, before she'd even begun her journey. The sandwich and chips suddenly felt leaden in her hand. Mallory turned back to Dale, who was still watching her, his posture tense. She took a step toward the counter. "Is this a joke?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. Dale shook his head slightly. "Security camera caught movement in your back seat while you were pumping gas," he said quietly. "Someone's definitely in there. I've already called the sheriff. They should be here in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Mallory's mind raced. 10 minutes was an eternity. What if whoever was in her car realized something was wrong? What if they came looking for her? As if reading her thoughts, Dale continued, "Stay in here. Bathrooms in the back if you want to lock yourself in. Or just hang out by the coffee. I'll keep an eye on your car." Mallory nodded numbly, her thoughts chaotic. Who could be in her car? The most obvious answer, Ryan, seemed unlikely. She'd left while he was at work and she'd been careful not to reveal her plans. But Ryan had friends, connections. Could he have somehow tracked her? Or was this something else entirely? A random carjacker, a thief, or worse? She moved away from the windows, back toward the coffee station where she couldn't be seen from outside. Dale busied himself with straightening items behind the counter, though his eyes kept darting to the windows. "Has this happened before?" Mallory asked, setting her purchases on a small table near the coffee pots. Dale glanced at her. "Not exactly like this, but we get all kinds out here. Middle of nowhere, open all night. Sometimes people think that makes us an easy target." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. "That's why we put in the cameras last year. Can you see the feed? Can you tell who's in my car?" Dale shook his head. "Monitors in the back office. I just caught the movement on my rounds. Someone shifting position between all your stuff. Couldn't make out a face." Mallory's phone was dead, or she would have called 911 herself, maybe even tried to record a video of her car as evidence. She felt trapped, helpless, her one means of escape, her car, now transformed into a threat. "The sheriff's good people," Dale offered, perhaps sensing her distress. "Deputy Harmon's probably on duty tonight. She don't mess around." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they only underscored the danger of her situation. Mallory found herself calculating distances, how far to the bathroom, how quickly she could lock herself inside if the door to the gas station opened. Her eyes darted to the windows again. Her car sat motionless under the lights, revealing nothing. Minutes stretched like hours. Dale tried to appear casual, restocking cigarettes behind the counter and adjusting the candy display, but his movements were stiff, his attention clearly divided. Mallory remained by the coffee station, her back to the wall, her purchases forgotten on the table. Finally, the distant wail of a siren broke the silence. Dale's shoulders sagged with visible relief. "That'll be them," he said. Mallory moved cautiously toward the front windows. A patrol car pulled into the gas station. lights flashing but siren now silent. It parked at an angle, partially blocking her Honda from the road. A uniformed officer emerged, a tall woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Deputy Harmon," Dale confirmed, moving to unlock the door. The deputy approached with brisk efficiency, her hand resting casually near her holstered weapon. "Dale," she acknowledged with a nod. "This the vehicle?" She gestured toward Mallory's car. "Yes, ma'am." "Customers inside." Dale held the door open wider and Deputy Harmon stepped into the store. Her assessing gaze fell immediately on Mallory. "Ma'am, I understand there may be an unauthorized individual in your vehicle. Is that your Honda Civic out there?" Mallory nodded, finding her voice. "Yes. I don't know who could be in there. I've been driving for hours." Deputy Harmon's expression remained neutral, professional. "Were your doors locked when you went inside?" "I think so. I mean, I always lock them, but I was tired and distracted." "All right. Stay in here with Dale. I'm going to take a look." The deputy turned to leave, then paused. "Vehicle registration in your name?" "Yes. Mallory Hall." Deputy Harmon nodded and exited the store, her movements deliberate and controlled. Through the windows, Mallory watched as the officer approached her car with caution, flashlight in one hand, the other still near her weapon. She circled the vehicle slowly, shining the light through each window, her expression revealing nothing. After completing her circuit, Deputy Harmon returned to her patrol car and spoke briefly into her radio. Then she approached the store again, entering with the same measured pace. "Ms. Hall," she said, "I need you to confirm something for me. You have several suitcases and boxes in your back seat, correct?" Mallory nodded. "Yes, I'm moving." "And a blue sleeping bag rolled up on the floor behind the passenger seat?" Mallory frowned. "No, I don't have a sleeping bag." Deputy Harmon's expression hardened slightly. "That's what I thought. There is definitely someone in your vehicle. They're lying on the floor of the back seat, covered with what appears to be a blue sleeping bag or blanket. I couldn't get a clear look at them." The confirmation sent a chill through Mallory. Someone had been with her for hours, hiding just inches away as she drove through the darkness. Watching her. Waiting. "I've called for backup," Deputy Harmon continued. "Should be here in about 5 minutes. Once they arrive, we'll approach the vehicle and order the individual to exit. If they don't comply, we'll extract them. Do you think?" Mallory hesitated, afraid to voice her fear. "Could it be my ex? I left Knoxville today. He doesn't know where I'm going, but does he have a history of violence or stalking behavior?" the deputy asked. Mallory swallowed hard. "He has a temper. He's never hit me, but he's punched walls, broken things. When he gets angry, he changes." Deputy Harmon nodded, her expression softening slightly. "We'll handle this carefully, Ms. Hall. If it is your ex, we'll make sure he's detained properly." She glanced at Dale. "Any chance you can pull up that security footage now? Might help to know what we're dealing with." Dale nodded. "I'll check the back office. Should be recording continuously." As Dale disappeared into the rear of the store, Deputy Harmon turned back to Mallory. "While we wait for backup, can you tell me anything else that might be relevant? Has anyone besides your ex expressed interest in following you? Any unusual encounters today during your drive?" Mallory shook her head. "No, nothing. I stopped for gas a few times, used the bathroom, got coffee. But I didn't talk to anyone, didn't notice anyone paying attention to me." She paused, thinking. "I did leave my car unlocked at a rest stop about 5 hours ago. I was only gone for maybe 3 minutes to use the bathroom and there weren't many people around, but I guess someone could have gotten in then." 5 hours, the deputy repeated thoughtfully. "That's a long time for someone to hide in a vehicle without being detected." "I had the radio on for most of it," Mallory said. "And then I was just focused on staying awake, watching the road." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a second patrol car, its lights also flashing as it pulled into the gas station. At the same time, Dale emerged from the back office, a tablet in his hands. "Got the footage," he announced. "Not great quality, but you can definitely see something moving around in there." Deputy Harmon gestured for Dale to bring the tablet closer. Mallory moved to look as well, her heart pounding as Dale pulled up the video. The grainy black and white footage showed her car from above, captured while she was inside the store. For several seconds nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, something shifted in the back seat. A dark shape rose slightly, then settled again. The movement was brief but unmistakable. "There," Dale said, pointing. "And there's more. Watch." He fast-forwarded slightly. The video showed Deputy Harmon circling the car with her flashlight. And then, as the deputy moved to the far side of the vehicle, shape in the back seat rose again. Higher this time, definitely a human form, peering cautiously over the seat toward the front of the car. The figure seemed to be checking if the coast was clear. "Freeze it there," Deputy Harmon instructed. Dale complied, and they all stared at the grainy image of a hooded figure partially visible above the car seat. "Can't see a face," the deputy muttered. "But definitely male, I think. Average build." Mallory felt sick. The figure could have been Ryan. The height and build were similar, but she couldn't be certain from the poor quality image. And the fact that she couldn't rule it out terrified her. Deputy Harmon handed the tablet back to Dale and touched her radio. "Unit 2 in position?" she spoke into it. "Affirmative," came the crackling reply. "Ready when you are." "All right," Deputy Harmon said, turning to Mallory. "My colleague and I are going to approach the vehicle. We'll order whoever's inside to exit with their hands visible. If they comply, we'll detain them for questioning. If not, we'll have to extract them forcibly. Either way, I need you to stay in here until we give the all clear." "Understood." Mallory nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. "Dale, keep the door locked," Deputy Harmon instructed. Then she was gone, moving with purpose toward her patrol car. Through the windows, Mallory watched as Deputy Harmon conferred briefly with her colleague, a shorter, stockier officer whose name tag she couldn't read from this distance. They positioned themselves strategically, one on either side of her Honda, their weapons drawn but pointed downward. Deputy Harmon raised a bullhorn to her mouth. Her voice came through clearly, amplified and authoritative. "Attention individual in the blue Honda Civic. This is the Sheriff's Department. We know you are in the vehicle. Exit now through the rear driver's side door with your hands raised. Do it slowly." Silence followed her command. Mallory held her breath, watching her car for any sign of movement. Nothing happened. Deputy Harmon repeated her instruction, her tone more forceful this time. Again, there was no response from the vehicle. The two officers exchanged glances across the roof of the car. Some silent communication passed between them, and they adjusted their positions slightly, moving closer to the rear doors. "This is your final warning," Deputy Harmon announced. "Exit the vehicle now or we will remove you by force." Still nothing. Mallory's heart hammered in her chest. Why wouldn't they come out? Were they hoping the officers would give up? Or were they planning something worse? Deputy Harmon nodded to her colleague, who moved to the rear driver's side door, positioning himself to open it while maintaining cover. Deputy Harmon kept her weapon trained on the backseat area, ready to respond to any threat. In one swift motion, the second officer yanked open the rear door and stepped back. "Sheriff's Department," he shouted. "Come out with your hands up. Now." From her vantage point in the store, Mallory couldn't see into the open doorway of her car. She could only watch the officers' reactions. Both maintained their positions, weapons still drawn, expressions tense but professional. "I see you under that blanket," Deputy Harmon called out. Last chance to come out voluntarily. A few more seconds passed. Then, slowly, a blue fabric, the sleeping bag Deputy Harmon had mentioned, shifted in the back seat. A hand emerged, pale and male, followed by an arm clad in dark material. "That's it," Deputy Harmon encouraged, her voice firm but not aggressive. "Both hands where we can see them. Then exit slowly." Another hand appeared. Then, with awkward movements constrained by the car's interior, a figure began to emerge from the rear door. First a hooded head, then shoulders, torso, legs. As the figure straightened outside the car, Mallory gasped. Even from this distance, even with his face partially obscured by the hood, she recognized him instantly. Ryan. Her ex-boyfriend stood beside her car, hands raised, his expression a mixture of defiance and resignation as the officers moved in to handcuff him. Mallory felt her knees weaken, and she grabbed the edge of the counter for support. "You know him?" Dale asked, watching her reaction. Mallory nodded numbly. "My ex. I left this morning while he was at work. I don't understand how he found me, how he got into my car." Dale's expression was grim. "Doesn't matter now. They've got him. You're safe." Outside, the officers secured Ryan's hands behind his back and walked him to one of the patrol cars. Deputy Harmon spoke into her radio again, then approached the store. Dale unlocked the door to let her in. "Ms. Hall," she said, her voice gentler than before, "we've detained the individual. Can you confirm his identity for us?" "Ryan Mercer," Mallory said, her voice shaking slightly. "He's my ex-boyfriend. We lived together in Knoxville until this morning, I guess." Deputy Harmon nodded. He had no ID on him, so that confirmation helps. We'll need to take a formal statement from you. And you should know, we found items of concern in his possession. Mallory's stomach dropped. What kind of items? A hunting knife, zip ties, duct tape. Deputy Harmon paused, letting the implications sink in. And a cell phone with your location tracked through a hidden app. The world seemed to tilt under Mallory's feet. She'd suspected Ryan was controlling, possessive, even potentially dangerous when angered. But this revelation suggested something far more sinister, a level of premeditation that chilled her to the bone. I didn't know, she whispered. About the tracking app, I mean. He must have installed it without me knowing. These types often do, Deputy Harmon said. Based on what we've found and your previous statement about his behavior, we have grounds to hold him. But we'll need your cooperation to press charges. Cooperation. Charges. The words swirled in Mallory's mind, abstract concepts that couldn't quite penetrate the fog of shock enveloping her. She'd left to get away from Ryan, to start fresh with her sister's help. She hadn't planned on restraining orders or court appearances or testifying against the man she'd once loved. I know it's a lot to process, Deputy Harmon continued, seeming to sense her overwhelm. For tonight, let's focus on getting you somewhere safe. Is there someone nearby you can stay with? I wouldn't recommend continuing your journey in your current state. Mallory shook her head. My sister's in Pittsburgh, but that's still hours away. I don't know anyone closer. There's a decent motel about 20 minutes from here, Dale offered. Nothing fancy but clean, secure. Owner's my uncle. I can call ahead, make sure they hold a room. Deputy Harmon nodded approvingly. That would be helpful, Dale. She turned back to Mallory. We'll need you to come to the station first to make a statement. Then one of our officers can escort you to the motel. We'll keep Mr. Mercer in custody overnight at minimum, pending charges. The practicality of these arrangements gave Mallory something concrete to focus on. She nodded, gathering her scattered thoughts. My car. It's secure, Deputy Harmon assured her. We'll have an officer drive it to the station for you. We'll need to check it thoroughly, make sure there's nothing else of concern inside, but it should be released back to you by morning. Thank you, Mallory said, the words inadequate for the immense gratitude she felt. If Dale hadn't noticed the movement in her car, if he hadn't slipped her that warning note, she shuddered to think what might have happened when she'd stopped for the night, or arrived at her sister's apartment. As if reading her thoughts, Deputy Harmon added, You were lucky tonight, Ms. Hall. Not many people would have noticed what Dale did, or taken the initiative to warn you quietly. Dale shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. Just did what anyone would do. No, Mallory said firmly, finding her voice again. Not anyone. Most people would have looked the other way, told themselves they were imagining things. She met Dale's eyes directly. You saved my life tonight. I'm certain of it. Dale's cheeks reddened slightly. Let me call my uncle about that room, he mumbled, retreating behind the counter to make the call. Deputy Harmon placed a gentle hand on Mallory's arm. Ready to go? My colleague can take your statement while I process Mr. Mercer. Mallory nodded, her mind already racing ahead. She would need to call her sister once her phone was charged, explain the delay. She'd need to cancel her old credit cards, change her passwords, purge her devices of any tracking software Ryan might have installed. And she'd need to decide how far she was willing to go legally to ensure he couldn't follow her again. But those were tomorrow's problems. For tonight she was safe. Ryan was in custody. And maybe, just maybe, this terrifying detour was the wake-up call she needed to break free from his influence permanently. As she followed Deputy Harmon outside, passing her Honda, now just a car again, no longer a trap, Mallory felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, but alongside it, something new was emerging, resolve. She would not be a victim. Not tonight. Not ever again. But those were tomorrow's problems. For tonight she was safe. Ryan was in custody. And maybe, just maybe, this terrifying detour was the wake-up call she needed to break free from his influence permanently. As she followed Deputy Harmon outside, passing her Honda, now just a car again, no longer a trap, Mallory felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, but alongside it, something new was emerging, resolve. She would not be a victim. Not tonight. Not ever again. But those were tomorrow's problems. For tonight she was safe. Ryan was in custody. And maybe, just maybe, this terrifying detour was the wake-up call she needed to break free from his influence permanently. As she followed Deputy Harmon outside, passing her Honda, now just a car again, no longer a trap, Mallory felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, but alongside it, something new was emerging: resolve. She would not be a victim. Not tonight. Not ever again. "Are you in a safe location, Ms. Hall?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes," Mallory lied, unwilling to retreat further. "I'm observing from a distance." "He hasn't seen me." "Officers are being dispatched now," the dispatcher assured her. "They should arrive within 5 minutes. Please remain where you are, out of sight if possible." Mallory agreed, ending the call. She then texted Emma, "Ryan is here. Police coming. I'm safe." Almost immediately her phone rang, Emma calling back in alarm. Mallory silenced it without answering. She couldn't risk the noise alerting Ryan to her presence. From her vantage point half a block away, she continued to observe him. He seemed agitated, checking his watch repeatedly, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His right hand kept straying to the pocket of his hoodie, then withdrawing, as if reassuring himself that something was still there. A weapon. The thought chilled her, but Mallory forced herself to remain calm. The police were coming. She was at a safe distance. Ryan still hadn't noticed her. Then, as if her thoughts had somehow reached him, Ryan's head turned. His gaze swept the street, passing over her position once, then returning with sudden recognition. Their eyes met across the distance. Time seemed to freeze as understanding dawned on his face. First surprise, then a dark emotion Mallory couldn't quite name. Not anger exactly. Something colder, more calculated. Ryan stepped away from the van, moving into the open. His right hand emerged from his pocket, and Mallory's breath caught as sunlight glinted off metal. A knife, similar to the one the police had confiscated in West Virginia. He took a step toward her, his intention clear in the set of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze. Mallory stood her ground. In that moment, something shifted between them, a rebalancing of power. Mallory wasn't running, wasn't hiding, wasn't cowering. She was facing him directly, phone still in hand, visibly unafraid. Confusion flickered across Ryan's features. This was not the scenario he had anticipated. Not the terrified ex-girlfriend he had expected to confront. The wail of approaching sirens broke the tableau. Ryan's head whipped toward the sound, his expression transforming from confusion to panic. He hesitated for another second, looking back at Mallory with what might have been regret or anger or both. Then he turned and ran, disappearing down a side street before the first police cruiser rounded the corner. 2 officers approached Mallory while others pursued Ryan's fleeing figure. They confirmed she was unharmed, took her statement, and escorted her the remaining distance to Emma's apartment, where her sister was waiting, frantic with worry. "You should have hidden," Emma scolded, hugging her fiercely. "He had a knife, for God's sake." "I know," Mallory acknowledged, "but I'm tired of hiding." Later that evening, as they sat together on Emma's couch, the police called with an update. Ryan had been apprehended attempting to board a bus out of the city. The knife had been recovered from a trash can where he discarded it during his flight. He was in custody, facing multiple new charges: violation of the restraining order, crossing state lines to commit a crime, possession of a weapon with intent to harm, resisting arrest. "He won't be making bail this time," the officer assured them. "And given the escalation, the prosecutor is pushing for maximum sentencing. You shouldn't have to worry about him for a very long time." After the call ended, Emma studied her sister with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "I still can't believe you just stood there when you saw he had a knife. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" "I do," Mallory admitted. "But something in me just refused to run again. And I think that's what threw him off, the fact that I wasn't afraid. At least, not in the way he expected me to be." Emma shook her head, but there was understanding in her expression. "You've changed," she observed. "Since that night at the gas station. You're, I don't know, stronger somehow." Mallory considered this. Had she changed? Or had circumstances simply revealed a strength that had been there all along, buried under years of Ryan's manipulation and control? "I think I just reached my limit," she said finally. "There's only so long you can live in fear before something in you rebels against it." That night, for the first time since fleeing Knoxville, Mallory slept deeply and dreamlessly, untroubled by nightmares of pursuing figures or hands emerging from darkness. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and the weight that had pressed on her chest for so long had lifted. Ryan was in custody. She had a new job, a new city, a supportive sister. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be court appearances, therapy sessions, moments of doubt and fear. But she had faced her pursuer and held her ground. She had reclaimed her right to exist without looking over her shoulder. As she prepared for work that morning, Mallory found herself thinking of Dale, the gas station attendant whose simple act of vigilance had set these events in motion. She hadn't heard from him since leaving West Virginia, though she'd sent a brief email of thanks a few days after arriving in Pittsburgh. On impulse, she composed another message before leaving the apartment. Dale, I wanted to update you. Ryan was arrested yesterday after violating the restraining order. He's in custody and likely to remain there for some time. I've started a new job here in Pittsburgh and am beginning to rebuild my life. None of this would have been possible without your intervention that night. I keep thinking about how differently things might have ended if you hadn't noticed the movement in my car, if you hadn't taken the risk of passing me that warning note. You didn't just alert me to danger, you reminded me that there are good people in the world willing to help strangers. I'll carry that lesson forward. Thank you again and always, Mallory. She hit send, then gathered her things and headed out to face the day, steps light with newfound freedom. The path forward was hers to determine, no longer shadowed by fear or defined by another's obsession. It had been a long journey from that fluorescent-lit gas station to this moment of true independence, but Mallory knew with quiet certainty that she would never look back. The gas station warning had saved her life in more ways than one, not just from the immediate threat in her backseat, but from the paralyzing fear that might have kept her running indefinitely. Sometimes, she reflected as she stepped out into the spring sunshine, salvation comes not just in being warned of danger, but in finding the courage to face it directly. And in that confrontation, discovering just how strong you truly are.